Okay, welcome to Thursday, everyone. June is Great Outdoors Month, but on this summer solstice, we're going to focus on the great indoors as we talk about LEED version 4, Interior Design and Construction. We're going to be covering the changes from LEED 2009 to LEED version 4. We're also going to discuss the thinking behind the changes and how these will influence market transformation and building performance. And just like our last webinar, we've got a new presenter on the webinar series. Please welcome Alicia Snyder-Carlson, who directs RWDI/Green Building Services operations for sustainability consultants, including project management and delivery. Alicia specializes in commercial interior and existing building programs for portfolio and volume projects, as well as one-off certifications for long-term sustainability strategies. Her approach to project management, from design to construction and all the way through building operations, has resulted in over 100 LEED certifications across several rating systems. Alicia's background in green building, interior design, and teaching industry professionals provides a unique perspective and informed strategy for guiding clients in meeting their individual sustainability goals. She also develops and delivers content for RWDI and Green Building Services educational platforms. Alicia has been an invited speaker and educator at numerous local and national events and conferences, including NeoCon, Greenbuild, and ASID's Legislative Symposium. Now, before we can welcome Alicia to the webinar, I need to tell you about PowerShift by NV Energy. You can never save too much energy or money. That's why NV Energy has introduced PowerShift to help its residential and business customers conserve even more energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift by NV Energy is also about providing you with excellent customer service. It's your one-stop shop to find all the energy-efficient products and services to help you boost your bottom line, along with convenient ways to manage your account. PowerShift Energy Advisors are dedicated to working side by side with business customers to discuss their needs and to find energy efficiency solutions that save money. Plus, their Business Solutions Center is the place to go to discuss your bill payments and account-related questions. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Now, during the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for our guest. Simply use that questions box, probably over on the right side of your screen. I'll review those questions and I'll ask them to Alicia during the Q&A time that we've set aside after her presentation. Alicia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the presentation. Here's a quick picture of me so you can kind of visualize who's talking to you. Just a couple slides before we get started. We have this presentation certified through the AIA and LEED for CEUs, and this is important information that we're not selling a product to you, we're actually educating you. This is the abstract for the webinar, so very similar to what Mark just read through, so I won't read the whole slide for you all, but it's there for reference. And so a key point for earning your CEUs are the learning objectives of the course. So we have 4 for this course. First one being discuss overarching changes in the structure and content to LEED v4 ID&C, including intent behind changes, tips for success, and potentially related cost increases. So just a note here, we are not going to cover every single credit. That would take like a whole day, but we're going to cover all the credits that had major changes. Learning objective number 2, illustrate the value of building consensus among stakeholders through the integrative process credit. 3, explain changes to BPDO credits, EPDs, sourcing of raw materials and material ingredients, including credit requirements and strategies. Just a quick note there on that one, we've seen the biggest change in ID&C happen with the materials and resources credit, which is why we'll spend just a little bit more time on those few credits. And number 4, describe how to find and interpret data for LEED v4 ID&C IEQ credit, low emitting materials. Again, similar to the materials and resources credit category, this IEQ, low emitting materials credit, also saw substantial change. Brief snapshot of the agenda. So we'll kind of just talk a little bit about LEED v4 and kind of what led up to the changes for version 4. Again, we're going to go through the new and revised credits, the ones with major changes, and then we have a case study at the end of this presentation. So getting right to it, what's new with LEED v4 And why did it have to change? So here we are. After 2013, all the way into 2018, LEED version 4 was released right around, I believe it was 2012. And some of the things that you will find in LEED version 4 are credit updates, new categories, sort of raise the bar for the industry, and a focus on life cycle analysis. Well, before we got to this point, you might recall, if you've been doing LEED work for some time, we started with LEED version 2. And quickly, the organization USGBC, or the US Green Building Council, found that one version of LEED didn't fit all building types. So they started some offshoots for different building types and adaptations of that one rating system. And then ultimately decided that there was too much going on. The rating systems were all going in sort of different directions, and they needed to kind of streamline their approach to what the rating systems were doing. So that's where LEED v3 came in. There was a more consolidated version. All the points started aligning, the credit categories started aligning with each other a bit more. And instead of really having these individual rating systems, they combined them into one, and now we see 3 major rating systems, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that have specialty paths for these different building types. So moving to LEED version 4, the USGBC essentially looked at projects across the globe and said, so when is the best time to create a new version? When we switched to LEED version 3, or LEED version 2009, there wasn't a substantial change in the credit requirements. It was mostly point increases or decreases and thresholds changing slightly, but the requirements for each credit remain mostly the same. So once all of those projects ended up seeing more and more platinum and gold certifications, USGBC sort of re-evaluated and said, okay, we're at a place where the market has caught up, as well as project teams. They understand what they're doing. Now let's reinvent ourselves again and create a new standard, V4, that starts pushing the market transformation again. So just a quick bit of information. Studies show that the minimal increase in cost construction over LEED version 2009 was 0 to 2%. When we look at LEED version 4, we're seeing more soft costs as opposed to hard costs coming up. So meaning there's a lot more research and sort of upfront analysis that's taking place in the design stages for LEED version 4, as opposed to costs associated with construction materials and that sort of thing. There's some savings with LEED version 4 due to some LEED online efficiencies. And one little quick note here that photometric analysis is not required, and that's specific for the light pollution reduction. There's a different calculation for that one. So a lot of teams really like hearing that. So we like to say, don't fear the 4. While it is more stringent than version 2009, and there is a little bit of a gap with the market or the industry with products catching up to some of the certifications, we are seeing success on our V4 projects. So it is a goal that's attainable, and don't fear it. It's like any new thing, just getting back on the bike and trying again. So new in LEED v4, the impact categories have been updated and revisited again. We'll talk a little bit about them on the next slide. Again, there's increased technical rigor. We're raising the bar of performance, really creating opportunities for additional market transformation. There have been additional market sectors added. So I believe data centers are one of the key ones that have been added to the rating systems to address the unique scenarios of that building type. There are additional support tools and resources. A lot of the LEED version 4 calculators have been revised, and they're much nicer to use than some of the version 3 options that are out there. And then this is kind of interesting. There are no longer any credit numbers. So where we used to have materials and resources credit 2, MRC2, we no longer have those at all. So it's just referring to the name of the credit at this point. So the impact categories really drive the changes that took place in the LEED v4 rating system. And this is typical of all of the rating system revisions. USGBC kind of goes back to their core driving principles, which are the impact categories, and assesses what might be most important at a given time. So right now, climate change is a big discussion point. Materials are really important in terms of how they affect human health. A lot of people are talking about that. And then just overall general water resource, biodiversity. And then you'll also see many credits are looking at social equity and ensuring that there's environmental justice within communities and things like that. So as I mentioned, there are some additional market sectors. When you're looking at this slide, just for your reference, the major reference guides are on the left. So that's LEED for building design and construction, interior design and construction, building operations and maintenance, and then LEED for neighborhood development. And then let's see, so then the rating systems, if you will, that fall into those reference guides are listed on the right-hand side. The ones that have arrows pointed at them are new. So you can see in some cases, hospitality is a rating system or has alternative compliance paths within multiple LEED reference guides. Since this presentation is focusing on the interior design and construction or IDNC rating system or reference guide, just a quick snapshot of that reference guide in particular and the 3 market sectors that are available here. And looking a little bit more at how the rating system has changed and the focus has shifted, we're looking at market transformation. And one of the big things for USGBC is that the market continues to evolve. So we're no longer looking at open systems, but we're really making a shift to try to look at closed systems only. So next we're going to look at new and revised credits. Okay, starting at a high level, just note this slide is specific to BD&C. So we have on the left, the LEED v3 credit categories, the main ones that you saw, and now in LEED v4, we actually have 2 new credit categories, that being integrative process and location and transportation. However, in the IDNC rating system, we have the same new credit categories. However, there's no sustainable sites associated with this reference guide. And really that's because these credits are associated with requirements that the tenant doesn't have control over. So digging a little deeper, this is a sort of, again, another snapshot of the full rating system, credit categories, and the credits. I've identified here sort of the major changes in the credits that we're going to be talking about further today. And again, just a reminder of the rating system structure, there are 100 points, technically 110 when you count the bonus points. 8 are prerequisites. Those 10 bonus points are associated with innovation credits and regional priority credits. What's new with innovation is that you can only achieve 2 points for exemplary performance, and your LEED AP has to have that rating system specialty. So you have to be a LEED AP ID plus C specialty to achieve that credit within this rating system. Okay, now looking at the credit categories themselves and the credits in these categories. I just really love this cartoon. I think it's older, but it just really describes and illustrates some of the traditional patterns that you might see on a project. You may have experienced some of these, not exactly some of these, but some of these scenarios on your project teams where, you know, the architect or the engineer are really coming from very different places. So that's really where the integrative process is meant to kind of bring everybody together, all the stakeholders, and help tie different perspectives on the design team to create solutions for the project, as opposed to getting into the middle of design or even maybe in construction and finding out that you really didn't have the same vision as what you thought you were all talking about. So within the integrative process, again, this is a new credit category. It's really looking at project planning and design in an integrative fashion. And note that this is a prerequisite for healthcare projects. Okay, so you've got some of the credit requirements up on this slide. The intent of this credit is to support high-performance, cost-effective outcomes through early analysis of interrelationships among systems. So this credit really helps you identify what's to be covered in the design charrette. It makes the process more rigorous and provides a consistent framework to document the outcomes. The tips here are to note that there's an integrative process worksheet that's provided by the USGBC. Again, sort of a tool that's there to help you out and move you along throughout this process. And then what's critical here is that the start of the OPR is developed. And that OPR, if you're not familiar, is the owner's project requirements. It's a key document as part of the commissioning credit, or prerequisite, I should say. So when you're going into an eco charrette and sort of thinking about your integrative process, what you really want to consider is like what's most important about early design, what would be a marker for success of the project, and how you will measure that success. And then at the end of the project, how do you tell that story? So these are all things that probably the owner is thinking about and things that you want to bring to kind of maybe as an icebreaker in your eco charrette. Looking at the integrated process worksheet further, again, this is provided by USGBC. There's a site selection, which is for ID&C projects only, and really focusing on what the tenant, again, has control over. So there's a site section, site selection for IDC, there's site-specific elements for other rating systems, and then there's a water section. So again, any number of considerations should be taken during your integrative process and your eco charrette meetings, and that would be site considerations, lighting, both natural light and electric light, your ventilation options, whether that's natural ventilation or mechanically created, any thermal comfort ranges and considerations for occupancy, and other things along those lines that you can see listed on the slide. Another requirement is to complete a Shoebox energy model, and this really helps you create or establish a baseline for comparison, and that then allows you to test design alternatives to inform decisions, evaluates building orientation and massing, helps you understand your primary building systems, and really seeks to evaluate and optimize your integrated strategies. So the Shoebox energy model is a key element now of that credit requirement. So moving along, the location and transportation credit category. Again, this is a new credit category. We've seen some sites credits from version 3 move into this category, and then also some additional credits added. So I always find this stat interesting that 30% more energy is expended by office workers commuting to and from the building than is consumed by the building itself. So this credit category is really getting at how single vehicle occupancy use impacts energy use within our daily lives. Okay, so new to the rating system is this credit, LEED for neighborhood development location. So out with LEED building certification points, in with neighborhood development. And some of the key tips here are to really consider or create a broker or lease checklist with key site considerations, so that even from the get-go, your broker, the person who's out like looking at spaces to lease is really starting to consider some of the site elements and how they might impact the LEED rating system if you're pursuing a LEED certification. It is important to note here that your projects attempting this credit are not eligible to earn the other credits within this credit category. Next credit is surrounding density and diverse uses. So this is similar to the approach that was in LEED v3 and modified or became more stringent in LEED v4. The intent is to conserve land and protect farmland and wildlife habitat by encouraging development in areas with existing infrastructure. It promotes walkability and transportation efficiency and reduce vehicle distance traveled. So the big tip here is that for surrounding density, the boundary is not a quarter mile radius from the entrance. It's actually a quarter mile offset, and that's going to mimic the LEED project boundary. With diverse uses, tips here is that the walking route must be along safe paths, so sidewalks, crosswalks if you need to cross the street. And then again, point thresholds change for the types of uses available. So that really gets at if you have, a restaurant or community services like a park or a library, there's a certain cap on some of those, and then you get more points for some of them, or I guess more contribution to achievement. Okay, looking at access to quality transit. The intent of this credit is to encourage development in locations shown to have multimodal transportation choices, or otherwise reduce motor vehicle use, and thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and other environmental and public health harms. So, new within this credit is that now rail and ferry is added into the options for quality transit. Again, another change is that this is not based on a radius any longer. It's the shortest path from the project site, and that is measured along the actual walking path. So you want to make sure, again, that that's a safe walking path. And it's based on the number of trips. So it's a little bit more difficult to achieve than it was in B3, but we're still seeing, as long as you're in a downtown area, you're still seeing the ability to earn this credit. The other tip here is that weekday and weekend trips are included. So there's a minimum for each, and that's shown on this slide. So if you're looking at daily transit within a quarter mile for bus, streetcar, rail, or ferry, that is 72 weekday trips, or excuse me, 40 weekend trips earns 1 point, and so on. And the second table is for the ferry or rail service within a half mile. Okay, moving on to bicycle facilities. The intent of this credit is to promote bicycling and transportation efficiency, and again, to reduce that vehicle distance traveled. So one really important element of this, you must be connected to a bicycle network. So that means that there needs to be bike lanes around your property, your project. Again, in downtown areas that are sort of on the leading edge, we're finding that this isn't an issue. And even some urban locations sometimes have this as well, depending on your location. So that's a key element. You want to look at that first. And then the bike parking is actually now revised to be based on short-term and long-term park uses, occupant uses. We also have a requirement if there's residential spaces within your building that there's another bike parking area for residents. And then similar to V3, we need to have showers or changing rooms. In this case, it's 1 shower per 100 occupants, and then an additional shower per the next 150. Okay, reduce parking footprint. This is very similar to the previous version. However, your points or your cases, the options available to you in this credit are really based on the points that you've earned in the surrounding density and diverse uses credit or the access to quality transit. So they're looking at what's available around your site and then influencing or basically telling you what path you need to take. It requires you to be at or under the local zoning code parking capacity, and does also require 5% preferred parking for carpools. For those commercial interior projects that have no associated off-street parking, you automatically achieve the credit. So that's similar to the previous version as well. So the one cost that we might see here is an additional cost for the preferred parking signage or the designation, whether that's a paint on the asphalt in the stall or a sign that's actually right in front of the stall. There's a little bit of cost there, but not any increase from what we saw in V3. Looking at the next credit category, water efficiency. Water efficiency is an important element for all of us. I believe it's a regional priority credit in every single region because it's that important. And this one fact that I find very interesting is that Americans use on average 100 gallons of water each day. That's a lot of water. I will note that it's looking at not only what you drink and use in terms of showering, brushing your teeth, and so on, but probably also what you use in cooking. There's a huge amount of water that's lost just from the preparation of food. So the biggest change in this category is that the credit has moved to a prerequisite. And so just a quick look, again, since this is one of those unique credit categories where they're just a handful of credits, the main core issue here is that we're trying to replicate sort of the hydrologic cycle that's in our natural environment, in our urban environment. So any way that we can reuse water is really encouraged within the rating system. And just a few other stats here on water use that makes it such an important credit category. I'm not going to go through each one of these. We have quite a few slides to go through, so they're there for your reference, and we can share the slides after the presentation. So again, the big change here is that there is a prerequisite associated with this credit category now, and then your credits earn you additional points by achieving additional savings. So it's a very similar calculation method. I believe the LEED tool is the same tool. A couple new requirements are that you have to have a water sense label on your toilets, urinals, private lavatory faucets, and your shower heads. If you have appliance or processed water, those also are required to be included in the calculations. So dishwashers and other types of processed water uses. Energy and atmosphere is the next credit category. So because energy is one of the most prominent areas of environmental concern, this impact category carries the most potential points of all the categories in the LEED rating system, with 33 points available. There's one new prerequisite, one new credit, and substantial modification of 4 credits. Looking at fundamental commissioning and verification, prerequisite, the intent here is to support the design, construction, and eventual operation of a project that meets the owner's project requirements. Again, that's the OPR, and we're looking at energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. Some additional requirements include added requirement for preparing an operations and maintenance plan, modified intent to ensure the project meets energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability within that OPR. And then the electrical and plumbing scopes are expanded a little bit. So we're seeing some soft costs in this prerequisite and the associated credit enhanced commissioning, just because there's a few additional testing requirements and a few additional tasks that the commissioning agent or commissioning authority would take into consideration or complete on site and throughout the design process. So the systems to be commissioned are all your typical systems, mechanical, HVAC, and our equipment and controls that are associated with those, including your lighting controls, plumbing, including domestic hot water, pumps and controls, your electrical, including your service, distribution, lighting and controls, including daylighting controls and occupancy sensors, and then renewable energy systems if those are found on your project. I really like this picture. If it's not obvious what's going on here, this is the kind of stuff that we have found on projects. It's a real picture, and that is a pipe running with ductwork totally cut out. So that's not good. We don't want to see that. Air can't flow through there, or you're having a major efficiency issue there with air not being actually pushed through correctly through the ductwork. So looking at the associated credit, enhanced commissioning, just a reminder, fundamental commissioning is a prerequisite. So the biggest changes here are that there are added options for monitoring base commissioning and envelope commissioning. There is an added requirement to prepare the building operations for the intended operation of building systems, and a clarified language for those who can be the commissioning authority. One of the options that's available within the enhanced commissioning credit is essentially replaces the M&V credit that was previously in LEED version 3. So the good thing here is that there are several options that you can use to select the scope that best fits your project needs. One other tip is that seasonal testing is required if the project reaches substantial completion during peak heating or cooling months. Okay, and looking at some of those additional requirements, so with enhanced commissioning, the commissioning authority is reviewing contractor submittals. They're including the system's manual requirements in the construction documents and a whole list of other things here, including the verification of seasonal testing that we just talked about, doing a building operations review at 10 months after substantial completion, developing an ongoing commissioning plan. So there's currently no requirement to actually implement that ongoing commissioning, but you should identify how it will be implemented. And ideally, the project is taking measures to actually complete that into the future after the project is completed. So looking at minimum energy performance. The intent for this credit is to reduce the environmental and economic harms of excessive energy use by achieving a minimum level of energy efficiency for the building and its systems. There are two options for credit compliance within this credit. The first one is tenant level energy simulation, which is essentially an energy model of the tenant space. You would include certain elements of the base building. And then the second option is your prescriptive compliance. And this very much aligns with the requirements of V3. So you'll see requirements for lighting, reduction, Energy Star equipment and appliances, and there's some HVAC related paths. Both options are looking at using ASHRAE 90.1 2010, which is the new ratings referenced standard, and again, it's more stringent. There's some additional requirements within that standard that are needed to be met. And we're seeing, again, if you pursue the energy model, a soft cost, so in design associated with that energy analysis. And then sometimes there's a hard cost associated, especially for tenant improvements, because maybe your building systems aren't up to par, you're not getting the points that you need out of the rating system through the building systems that are provided, and so maybe you decide to purchase additional systems or supplemental systems, or maybe new systems depending on the tenant. So optimized energy performance is the associated credit to the minimum energy performance prerequisite. Within this credit, there are new options to gain points through building envelope efficiency. So if that's something that the tenant has control over or influence over, that might be an option for your project. And then there's a shift with HVAC equipment efficiency shifting from the tenant installed systems to all systems, and those including the base building systems. So a little bit harder for some tenants to achieve this portion of the credit, simply because, again, they don't have control over that base building system. So it makes that site selection even more critical at the beginning of the project. So fundamental and enhanced refrigerant management are the next prerequisite and credit. So fundamental refrigerant management is the prerequisite, and then enhanced refrigerant management is the credit. The intent here is that you are trying to reduce your stratospheric ozone depletion. And essentially you're in compliance with the Montreal Protocol, which is talked about a lot in the V3 rating system, as well as here again. And this minimizes your direct contributions to climate change. So just a quick note, the enhanced refrigerant management credit is new to the ID&C rating system. It's not new to the LEED, but it's new to CI projects. Within the prerequisite, it's very similar to what you've seen on LEED V3 or 2009 projects, where it's no CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. And within the credit, there's a calculation, a refrigerant impact calculation that you can complete, or you're looking at no or low impact refrigerants. Based on the new requirements around this credit, they're looking at global warming potential and ozone depletion potential of refrigerants, specifically within your HVAC and R systems. And just to note that it's very difficult to get both of those numbers low. So there aren't a lot of refrigerants out there that are meeting that no or low impact refrigerant category. And so this is getting back to your market transformation and really the reference guide pushing manufacturers of these refrigerants and HVAC systems to really push for something better that doesn't have a direct impact on our climate and climate change. So again, hard costs would be associated with any system upgrades to get increased efficiencies. So the next credit is advanced energy metering. The intent here is to support energy management and identify opportunities for additional energy savings by tracking building level and system level energy use. The main idea being here that if you don't know what you're using, you can't really make improvements from a baseline. So understanding first your usage, and then being able to make strategic decisions to change that consumption pattern and adjust your building as needed. It also helps you identify issues within the building. So, you know, if a damper is open all the way and it shouldn't be, and you're using a whole lot more, bringing a lot more air into a building and having to cool that air, you're probably using a lot more energy than you need. So there are two options here, either just metering, which measures the total energy consumption of the tenant space, and you share data for 5 years with the USGBC. The second option being advanced metering. And this requires any individual energy end use that represents 10% or more of the total annual consumption to be metered. So that gets a little bit tricky. That typically means that your lighting needs to be on a separate meter from your plug loads and your HVAC systems. So costs associated with that would be those additional meters, where previously in LEED version 3, you could have your some of your lighting loads on the same meter as the plug loads. Okay, and the last credit within the energy and atmosphere credit category is green power and carbon offsets. This credit is meant to encourage the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through the use of grid source renewable energy technologies and carbon mitigation projects. It's very similar to what we saw in version 3, where you have to have a Green E certified or equivalent renewable energy certificates purchased. This is broken down now into 50% annual energy use for 1 point and 100% for 2 points. So there's no associated exemplary performance any longer. And then the one new requirement here is that offsets must be purchased for any gas usage. So RECs look at electricity use. If you have gas usage within your space, you're going to look at carbon offsets. So we've seen some low operational costs associated here with increased costs for RECs and offsets. I just heard from one of our renewable energy certificate providers that the cost has increased steadily over the year. It had a peak sort of at the beginning of the year, but it fell back down and now it's low, but still sort of steadily rising. And he actually attributed that to corporations coming online more and more with meeting their sustainability goals and purchasing more offsets than what they've seen in the past. So that's very interesting news. Okay, moving into the material and resources credit category. I like this little fact here that really hits home, that using or making recycled paper instead of new paper uses 64% less energy and uses 58% less water. So some of you may be familiar that there's lots of issues going on with recycling within the industry right now, and China has pushed back and not taken recycling from the US in many cases, mostly because consumers aren't properly cleaning their recyclables. So it's a little bit unfortunate, but there's still ways, especially with paper and construction products, to still get those products recycled within our country. So the first credit, or prerequisite, I should say, that we're looking at is construction and demolition waste management planning. So this is a new prerequisite. It does require the development of a construction waste management plan, and you do need to report the results, but you don't have to meet an achievement. So just again, you're just providing that diversion rate, but you don't have to actually hit a threshold like 20% or 30% diversion. The intent of the credit is to reduce construction and demolition waste disposed of in landfills and incineration facilities by recovering, reusing, and recycling materials. So the associated credit is construction and demolition waste management. This is where you see your thresholds appear for actual point achievement. There are two options within this credit. First is diversion, your sort of typical approach to the credit, as you saw with V3, where you would achieve a 50% or a 75% diversion rate, and you would get 1 or 2 points for that. The additional requirement here is that it requires the diversion of at least 3 material streams. So this essentially eliminates your commingled construction waste, and you really want to have site separation for at least 3 materials. So we often encourage contractors to have bins on site for the 3 main expected material streams. So maybe that's gypsum, wood, and metal. It could even be cardboard as you get closer to your installation date of furniture and things like that, where you're unpacking things. So that's a really key element that we're really moving away from commingled. And again, really the reason for this is that what USGBC has found through their research is that commingled construction waste is not getting recycled, either due to contamination of the material or what have you. It's going to the site and then it's just really going into the landfill instead of being recycled or reused. The second option within the credit is a reduction of total waste. And basically, it's a quick calculation to show that you do not generate more than 2.5 pounds of waste per square foot. And that would be of construction waste, of course. To achieve exemplary performance, there's no longer that 95% threshold. It's actually achieving both of the options within the credit. So we're seeing some increased costs associated with on-site waste separation, either from the contractor or the facility that may be charging it back to the project. Again, having those separate bins is really important for achievement of this credit. Not always feasible on a small lot line, but still something to strive for. So as I mentioned, we wanted to take a little bit closer look at the materials credits. So building product disclosure and optimization credits within the material and resources credit category. There are 3 associated credits with this sort of category, if you will. And each credit has multiple options or paths for pursuit. So I'm going to try and point out to you which are the most effective paths or readily available to projects to achieve. And again, we've started seeing these over the past year, more manufacturers getting up to speed on some of these requirements and certifications. So this is great. We're seeing that market transformation happen, and the credits are pretty readily available to achieve. So the first one is BPDO, just a reminder, building product disclosure and optimization. BPDO, environmental product declarations. So there are 2 options within this credit. The first being just simply getting 20 different permanently installed products from 5 different manufacturers that meet EPD criteria or environmental product declaration criteria. So that's having an EPD associated with the product. So we'll talk a little bit more about what it means to be a different permanently installed product. And that's important to keep in mind. I'll show you on the next slide. Excuse me, because not all EPDs are created equal. So some are worth more of a product than others. The second option is your multi-attribute optimization. And this is to have 50% of materials by cost meet this specific criteria available, and I have a little chart that outlines some of the criteria. So what's really critical in these credits and all of the materials credits is to ensure your specifications are up to date and review them sufficiently. Also, make sure you're reviewing those submittals when they come in to ensure that your products have the right requirements. It gets really tricky when you're looking at the different types of EPDs and tracking the information. So it's really important to get those specifications up to date. So here's where we're seeing some of those additional soft costs in terms of that product research that's taking place up front in the project. You'll want to ensure that your Division 1 LEED section is revised appropriately and includes the right requirements, and then also include in the submittal requirements in technical sections what you want to see from your contractors and subcontractors to ensure that you're getting the right data for your projects. So within LEED, they recognize 3 different types of EPD. The first being the least contributing to the credit achievement is the product-specific declaration. This is essentially a manufacturer's declaration of their own product. It will meet the ISO certification for an LCA, so they're going out and getting that third party, but then the rest of it is done in-house. So that is, and that should be publicly available. That applies to all of the EPDs. So this type of product is only worth a quarter of a product. And again, I'll show you a little chart of how this might all play out in a project. The second type of EPD is your industry-wide or generic EPD. This is also in a way manufacturer-driven, so it's more associated with, we see this with gypsum, ceiling tiles, and some other kind of standard building materials that have very similar qualities where, for example, the gypsum industry and several large manufacturers got together and said, hey, our gypsum is essentially manufactured the exact same way. Can we go in and get these certifications and split the cost essentially. So it's generic, it's not specific to a product or a manufacturer, but there are manufacturers that have contributed their data from their product to the EPD. So this type of EPD is worth half a product. And the third and final type of EPD is the product-specific Type 3 EPD. This type of EPD is worth one whole product, and it is fully third-party certified. Everything is done for a specific product, not a with a product within a line of a manufacturer's product line. So we'll see it for carpet, we'll see it on different flooring specs. We've even seen it on metal framing. So this is the best one you want to try and get. If you get all these, hit all these marks, they all have ISO processes associated with them. So there is some form of third-party certification for all of them. But again, this is the most stringent option. So here's a quick chart of the two options. So looking at, again, option one, the environmental product declaration, this is the easiest path to pursue in the credit right now. When you look at option two, the multi-attribute optimization, you can see the impact categories that you have to look at, which include global warming potential, depletion of stratospheric ozone layer, et cetera, and the list goes on there. So that's kind of hard information to find. It will typically be in a life cycle analysis report, but again, if it's not an ISO certified report, you're not going to get that contribution. So again, that option two takes a little bit more effort to research those specific items that are being met. So again, we prefer option one, seeking out those environmental product declarations, and ideally seeking products that have that product-specific Type 3 whole point contribution, whole product contribution. Looking at the next BPDO credit, sourcing of raw materials, there are two options here again. One being raw material source and extraction reporting, and leadership extraction practices. So the leadership extraction practices, I believe, is the third-party corporate sustainability reporting option, and that is the easiest option to pursue. Again, there are certain requirements within those CSR reports that you need to have met, so it's very important to look through the report and make sure that you're hitting all of the LEED requirements. So again, here's the chart of the two options, kind of identifying the two various options. I will say option two is probably not out of reach by any means. It really looks at very similar items to what you saw in version 3, where you're looking at recycled content, FSC wood, and that sort of single attribute optimization. And so, excuse me, so I was incorrect in my earlier statement. So we actually prefer option 2. It's a little bit easier to find. And I'm remembering now that with the third-party CSR reports, it's really difficult to hit all of the specific elements that LEED wants to see in those CSR reports. So an organization might have a third-party CSR report, but they might not hit every bullet that LEED wants you to include in those reports. So the last of the BPDO credits is material ingredients. There are 3 options within this credit category: material ingredient reporting, material ingredient optimization, and product manufacturer supply chain optimization. So I'll walk through those similar chart again with you in just another slide. So just really quickly, this credit is kind of where EPD meets your HPD. An EPD typically reports on 7 impact categories, which you can see in that image, and those are all really environmental impacts. The HPD adds 2 more impact categories, and those are focused on human health impacts and hazard reporting. So that's where the material ingredients and human health impacts come into play. So again, here's a chart of all the options available to you. We encourage option 1. That's going for the health product declaration. Oftentimes when we see that a product has an EPD, they often have an associated health product declaration, or HPD. These other options are available for different types of products as well. So the BIFMA obviously is for the furniture standard. So you might find a cradle-to-cradle certification or declare available to you. There are a couple websites that are super helpful to finding products. One being UL Spot database, which is online, free to use by anyone. Highly recommend it. There's the Declare database and the cradle-to-cradle database. Basically, these all have really great products available online to you. So as I mentioned, I would tell you a little bit more about that defining a product. So a couple implementation tips. So LEED looks at a product as it's defined by its function in the project. A product includes the physical components and services needed to serve the intended function. If there are similar products within a specification, each contributes as a separate product. And here are a couple scenarios. So with paints, your paints of different gloss levels are separate products because each paint type is specified to serve a different function. So a different product between gloss, matte, semi-gloss, eggshell, those are all different product types, even if they're the same color. But if you have different colors and they're all semi-gloss, they're not different products because they're essentially serving the same function. Looking at carpet as an example, if you have carpets of different pile heights, they are separate products because they're used for different kinds of foot traffic. The same carpet in a different color is not a separate product. And looking at a piece of furniture, so desk chairs and side chairs in the same product line are different products because they serve different functions. However, two chairs differing only in aesthetic aspects, such as the presence of arms, are not different products. And here is a quick chart, again, showing you how that EPD product weighting might play out. So if you have a 2x6 stud and it's a product specific, remember that's the least contributing product EPD type of 0.25, you'll get that, you sort of mark that up. The 2x8 stud, maybe that has a type 3 specific, product specific EPD, and that's the whole point. Similar with the eye joist. And then looking at the 5x8 ply, if that has an industry-wide type 3, so the generic one that's provided by an industry or several manufacturers has the half product, and then there's that last 5/8 OSB that might have a product specific. So you can kind of see how those have added up and they all become 3 whole products that are contributing to your credit achievement. So a little tricky. I highly recommend using the USGBC provided calculator as you're going through design to start identifying these. It'll really help you understand where you are in terms of credit compliance. So this is the last credit category. I know we're getting a little short on time. I think there are just a few slides left, so bear with me. So indoor environmental quality is a really important credit category because, as you can see here, we spend 90% of our time indoors. And the quality of our indoor environments has a direct impact on how we perform as people, whether we're at work, play, or rest. So this credit includes the substantial overhaul of one credit and the addition of another credit. So there's one new credit, one credit removed, and a substantial overhaul of one credit. Looking at environmental tobacco smoke control, or the no smoking signage that you're all familiar with, this credit is intended to prevent and or minimize exposure of building occupants, indoor surfaces, and ventilation distribution systems to environmental tobacco smoke. So you have your standard requirement of no smoking inside or outside the building and outside within 25 feet. There's now a new requirement that your signage is required to be posted within 10 feet of all entrances. So the substantially overhauled credit is your low emitting materials credit. And again, this is similar to the materials and resources credit category where we saw a really big overhaul in this materials related credit. The intent here is to reduce concentrations of chemical contaminants that can damage air quality, human health, productivity, and the environment. There are two options available: the product category calculations, which I'm going to talk about in more detail, and option 2, the budget method, which is very similar to the budget method in V3, where you're actually collecting all the data associated with the actual volume used. I will note, however, that you are required to include the volume of wet applied products in both options. So there's, again, a soft cost associated with contractors' time to gather that data and track the volume used, as well as on the design side to do the research. So the biggest shift here is that all these products need to meet the CDPH, or the California Department of Public Health. There are several certifications that meet that standard if they aren't going through the state specifically. Green Guard Gold in almost all cases, or I should say in all cases, meets that floor score, and the SCS certification, again, the gold level meets the CDPH standard. So just a couple other notes. This credit includes assemblies, and there are 6 product categories, 3 categories. If you achieve all 3 categories, you get 1 point. If you achieve 5 categories, 2 points. 6 categories is 3 points. And again, I have a chart to share with you to kind of outline that. So the big change here is that you're not just looking at VOC content, but you're also looking at VOC emissions. Content is the same as what it was in V3. You're looking for that VOC content, or volatile organic content, in grams per liter. And in addition to that, you're looking at that CDPH certification that shows the VOC emissions. And your emissions have to be shown in micrograms per M3 per hour. And again, that should be identified readily on the certificate of achievement. And from Green Guard Gold, it's very clearly outlined there that it's meeting the standard, and it identifies that emissions requirement. So again, here are the product categories in the first column here: paints and coatings, adhesives and sealants, flooring, composite wood, etc. And then you have your thresholds. So within paints and coatings and adhesives and sealants, 100% are your VOC content. That VOC in grams per liter has to meet those similar standards that you met in V3. And 90% of them have to meet the emissions evaluation. So that gives you a little bit of wiggle room. What we see there that fall into that 10% are things, smaller products used, such as plumbing, welding, and adhesives. A lot of those products haven't caught up in the market and don't meet that CDPH evaluation. Flooring, composite wood, and ceilings all need to meet 100% of the threshold. For flooring, ceilings, walls, and insulation, it's that general emissions evaluation, again, CDPH. For composite wood, it's no added formaldehyde. The urea piece goes away, and it's no added formaldehyde, or ultra low emitting formaldehyde. So those are the 2 options there, and 100% again has to comply. And then within furniture, it's 90% by cost, and that's the furniture evaluation. Again, it's the BIFMA standard that we're looking at that essentially meets CDPH. Okay, construction indoor air quality management plan. This is very similar to what you saw in V3. The one big change is that it requires no smoking on the job site and within 25 feet. So you've got to keep control of your contractor and all those subcontractors. We highly encourage signage to go up for this one. And it's very similar in the sense that it follows the SMACNA guidelines for protection of on-site materials and HVAC. Interior lighting changed slightly. So it's looking at lighting control as well as lighting quality. So there are several options available for the lighting quality. I have them on the next couple of slides, but I won't spend much time looking at them. And then the lighting control is similar to what you saw previously, where you want to have control for 90% of individual occupant spaces. The new requirement is that you have to have at least 3 settings, so more than just on and off. And here are some of those interior lighting quality strategies that you can achieve. And here are the next 3 associated. Again, I'll share the slides with you all, and you can have this for reference at a future date. So the daylight requirements have changed slightly. The biggest change here is that there is no path for the prescriptive approach, meaning you no longer look at your line of sight and how big the openings are and do that in a plan and elevation view, but you have 2 options for simulation and 1 option for measurement, and those are the only available options. So quality views is similar to V3, but has changed slightly, being that the biggest change being that you have to have a direct line of sight to the outdoors and at least 2 of the following kinds of views. So multiple lines of sight in different directions, views to flora, fauna, or sky, movement, objects at least 25 feet from the exterior glazing, unobstructed views, and views of the view factor of 3+. So that goes back to the calculation, but essentially they're ensuring that you're not just looking out the window at another brick wall, that there's actually some material or view of value that's helping reduce your stress, etc. Okay, the last credit in the indoor environmental quality category is acoustic performance. This is the new credit associated with this. This came over from the school's rating system. And basically it requires a reduced HVAC background noise, sound isolation, reduced reverberation time, and sound enforcement and masking. So obviously those are really important things for schools, and they're bringing that into the workplace. It does require on-site measurement, and there are requirements for your measurement devices to meet certain standards. So just really quickly, we talked about the changes in innovation and regional priority at the beginning of the presentation. Just to revisit this, there has been sort of substantial overhaul of 1 credit. And then exemplary performance have been reduced to just 2 points. And the substantial revision is for the LEED AP must hold a specialty to achieve that credit in the rating system. Regional priority, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. You can earn up to 4 out of 6 regional priority credits available to each project, and it's based on your geolocation. Previously, it was based on a zip code. Again, you go to the USGBC website and you plug in your address, and then you get the list of available credits. So we finally made it to the end. A quick case study. So one of our very first LEED V4, actually BDNC projects, is very close to certification, and it's the library at Bound Crossing in Boise, Idaho. It started actually a couple years ago, so it was one of the very early adopters of LEED V4. It's located in East Boise in a low density residential neighborhood. Again, it's about 16,000 square feet, and it's a building for the city of Boise, including 3 main parts, a lobby area, staff area, and then the large 7,000 square foot reading room. They are pursuing LEED NC V4 Silver certification. And mostly it's a requirement of the city of Boise that a silver level be achieved. So it was a little challenging to get there, but we're on our way to certification at that level. And we're excited about it. We just got our review comments in a couple weeks ago, so we're working through those. So just a little bit more detail on the site. There is actually a great bike and pedestrian green belt, if you will, or that bicycle network that we were talking about. So as I mentioned, when you're looking at the location and transportation credits, your achievement of those credits is heavily influenced by your location. We are finding also that achievement of those credits also influences whether or not your project is able to achieve higher levels of certification. So it's nice that the library is located near the river, which is why there's a bicycle and pedestrian path there available, and we were able to capitalize on those points. There are, let's see. So there is the bicycle network. They have 74 bicycle parking spaces for peak users and 4 low emitting vehicle charging stations. So quite a lot of bike parking spaces, but hopefully they're all being used with that great bicycle network around the site. So here's a sort of axonometric view of the site and the building. So you can see some of the details of the project site and the items that they're achieving. There's on-site stormwater capture. They sourced many materials locally. There's great daylight coming into the space. The roofing material is light colored. Again, there's bicycle parking. There's all LED throughout the building, LED lighting. And then a lot of those single attribute material contributions have been made, such as certified wood and recycled and regional materials. In thinking about the water credit and this site in particular, this is a great site really with that stormwater capture, trying to get back to that natural hydrologic cycle and conserving water. There's on-site recycling and storage. They are recycling 2 of 3 items in addition to electronic waste, batteries, mercury, and lamps. So what we saw in this project was, again, a few extra costs. The integrative design process, that was an additional cost that hadn't been planned for. In some states and cities, you have incentives available for that eco-charrette, so definitely look into that. In Portland, there's about $1,500 or $2,000 contribution to your credit or to your project through the city. So look out for those incentives. The Shoebox energy model was developed early in design. So again, that was another sort of soft cost early in the project. They added a good amount of metering, so there was some costs associated with that. And then additionally, there was both energy and water metering that had some additional cost. So lastly, what we found through this process is the credits that were most readily available to this project were optimized energy performance, maximizing the lighting quality, the energy model, and really seeking points through energy efficiency was key to this project's meeting its project's goal in terms of LEED Silver certification. And then because they were able to access those location and transportation credits, that really greatly increased their chance of getting to the Silver certification. So again, as I mentioned, if you're not able to get those location and transportation credits at all, you're really looking at lower levels of certification. And then the green building education piece was a really nice feature for this building in particular, being a library, but that is a very readily available credit to all projects. So just repeating a little bit of what I said, the site really influences your achievement of higher levels of certification, platinum especially. I would say that energy model also influence your ability to get to platinum certification. And then again, you have a bit more cost up front in the design phases associated with research and things like that to ensure that once you get to construction, you're really able to maximize the products that you've chosen and specifications. We really are holding our contractors to their feet to the fire to ensure that they're following the specs and don't substitute products unless they are compliant and equivalent to the achievement that the previous product was getting. So again, more analysis and more consultants are typically brought into the project early on. So we're seeing a little bit of higher costs there with those soft costs. So that's it. Thank you for holding out with me as I went over a little bit in time. Really appreciate you joining our webinar today. And as I mentioned, I'll work with the webinar team to get you all the slide deck for future reference.
All right, thank you, Alicia. And I'm going to get to some questions now. Please make sure to send in your questions if you haven't already. We're going to go to Deborah. She had a question about an IDC building, and this is in regards to water. What's really expected for the outdoor water use in a multi-tenant building where the IDC tenant doesn't have any outdoor water use?
Yeah, great question. So there really is no outdoor water use requirement for your IDNC project, like you said, because the tenant doesn't control those elements of the project. That being said, if your building does use a gray water system for toilets or anything like that, you can take advantage of that, and it will contribute to your indoor water use calculation. I think it's an alternative compliance path, but basically it accounts for that reused water within your project. So you could get the higher, meet the higher point threshold by achieving a greater reduction through that usage.
Okay. She also had another question about IDNC. Monthly monitoring is not required, is it? Because not every tenant's going to have a meter for energy use.
So that would be associated with the additional enhanced, I can't remember what the credit's called. It's in the energy and atmosphere credit category. Advanced energy metering, that's what it is. So if you want to pursue those additional points, you would need to have a tenant specific meter, typically for your HVAC and your lighting loads, and a separate one for your plug loads, anything that uses 10% or more energy within that space. So that is an additional cost, and you would have to work with the building to ensure that, you plan for your meter and then all of it can be separated out. There's no option, as there was in B3, to have the sort of prorated option available to you.
Okay. And then Neil had a question. I was trying to get some clarification from him, but he had a question that, if 100% of the lighting is LED, you're not going to have any mercury-containing lamps, are you?
Most likely not. So LED does not contain mercury. You can pursue the low mercury lamp option. That's a credit in the existing building rating system that you can apply for in the innovation credit category within this rating system. So you still have to do the calculations identifying all the lamps and quantities of them, but you're right, there would be really no mercury contribution. So we've seen that on projects where the mercury is 0, but you just have to go through the process of completing the calculations.
Okay, and he was able to provide me some additional context. He was asking about the he was referring to the waste management streams. One of the streams chosen potentially. So that was where the context of that was coming from, was the waste management streams.
Okay, so yeah, within that prerequisite and credit, you are required to recycle lamps. So if you don't have mercury-containing lamps, it's probably less valuable option, or you can identify in your submittal that you have LED lamps. I actually haven't looked into that in great detail, but I would imagine they still want to see the lamps recycled. I'm thinking maybe there might be take-back programs for those LED lamps.
Gotcha. I had a question for you. You talked early in the presentation about the footprint of commuters.
Yeah.
And, there's clearly encouragement for mass transit, biking. Is there any credit, or was there ever any consideration in the LEED V4 development process? Any consideration for businesses who allow telecommuters?
So that you don't see that in the IDNC or the BDNC rating system so much. It's really based on physical elements associated with the project site. However, in the existing building rating system, there's an alternative transportation credit, and that does actually look at the patterns of occupants and how they get to the building. So It looks at how many occupants have taken the train or the bus to work, and the points are achieved by reducing the single vehicle occupant use. So less so in IDNC and BDNC, but the premise is there that if you're supporting, carpooling spots and located in a location that has access to the train or the bus, then you're encouraging that increase in alternative transportation use.
Gotcha. But it's not a situation where, oh, I've got fewer employees actually showing up every day because I allow telecommuting. They're not getting penalized for that, are they?
No, they're not getting penalized for that.
Okay.
And I haven't looked into it, but you might be able to pursue that EB credit as an innovation and design credit.
Gotcha. Also, another question we have coming in regards to energy. Is a water-cooled chiller better than an air-cooled chiller?
That's a great question. It might be a little over my head. I would venture to say that it could be. It could very well depend on your location. It could depend on how much humidity is in your location, the other climatic elements that are influencing that, as well as how your space is used, how long you're running that system for. So I think it's probably a larger question that would an energy model would serve very well, or just engaging, like I usually engage our commissioning agents on that type of question, because they have a great deal of experience working with existing systems and multiple systems across many years of their experience that can, in general, say one way or another that, yes, this is more efficient, but you should consider X, Y, and Z, or what have you. So I don't know that there's a straight yes or no. One is better than the other.
There's a lot that goes into that question there. Also, a question from Jan. How do we ensure GBCI credits are registered?
Oh, for the course. So I will work with our educational specialists and ensure that that information is provided to you. Basically, for LEED reporting, it's all done through your account with GBCI, so you can self-report it, and we'll make sure that you get the number associated with this presentation. And then that's how that one's done. If you need the AIA credit, we'll follow up with certificates, and if you need to self-report it to another organization, like sometimes there's PEs can self-report their information, we can provide you a certificate of completion as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up by saying thank you, Alicia, for spending the time with us today to kind of walk us through a lot of the changes that have occurred. I really do appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And I want to certainly thank our audience for sticking around, for asking wonderful questions. Always very welcome to have questions and interaction with the audience. And also wanted to thank NV Energy for their sponsorship of this webinar and many of the webinars that we do here. We're going to take a little break from the webinar series, and we're going to let people enjoy their summers. Maybe go visit a national park. I think those will still exist, right? Hopefully they do. But however you decide to spend your time this summer, we hope you have a fun, safe, and memory-filled summer. You'll probably find me at a baseball diamond somewhere. But stay tuned to your inbox for information on the next webinar. Until then, I'm going to quote my favorite baseball broadcaster, Jack Buck, and say so long for just a while. Bye-bye.